So after I nearly caused the literary equivalent of World War III with my last video, we're back, baby, and ready to do it all over again. And so today I'm going to be tier ranking more classic books. It turns out that people are very passionate about this topic. You know, 1 minute you're reviewing Pride and Prejudice, the next you're being told to die. They were calling me every name under the sun, a Moby Dick without the Moby part. So hello, my name is Jack Edwards, welcome back to my YouTube channel and welcome to tier ranking classic books, the sequel. I'm hoping this overall project is gonna be War and Peace, in the sense that the first video was war, and this one is gonna be peace. We're all friends here, go easy on me. It is stupid, it is silly, none of this matters. And it's also entirely subjective. Anyway, here are the final rankings from the last video that I did. I will leave the link down below if you'd like to go and watch it. But today, the plan is to cover more contemporary classics, more classics from around the world, more underrated classics, and also pretty much just all the books that I had to cut from the last video so that it wasn't the length of Les Miserables. Because we really would have been the Miserables if that video had been any longer. So just like last time, these are the tiers. At the top, we have 6 out of 5 stars. These are elite, these are superb. We then have I Think You Dropped Something, My Jaw. Clothbound classic means these books are not overrated, they're not underrated, they're just perfectly rated. They deserve their status as a classic, they deserve to be in the canon. I think they're definitely worth reading, you should read them, but they're not my absolute favorites. Do you know what I mean? They're not top priority if you can only get to a few. Then we have Not Approved by Me. And then finally, because we're talking about the literary canon, the lowest tier is Shoot It from a Literal Canon, which I think is self-explanatory. But I'm gonna start with some reparations here, because people were very mad at me that I said the first Lord of the Rings book was just a bunch of creatures walking. I stand by it. That was literature student suicide. So we have The Hobbit, first and foremost, which I actually loved. How's that for a plot twist, baby? I enjoyed the world building in The Hobbit, the little maps, the little language, the little songs. I will be Tolkien about this one for a very long time. So, a little known fact is that A Christmas Carol is actually a book written by Charles Dickens and not something invented by the Muppets. And honestly, did the Muppets do it better? Perhaps. However, the source material is great, and normally this is a space on the internet reserved for Charles Dickens slander. This did the job. I think it's really good. It's a Christmas staple, and given how drunk I was last 25th of December, I think I might be being visited by the Ghost of Christmas Past this year as well. Next up, we have Vile Bodies. This is a book that I want to do the opposite of gatekeep. I literally want you and your family and your friends and everyone you've ever interacted with to read this book. It's one of my favorite books ever. It's silly, it's frivolous, and it's a roaring good time. It's told in this kind of episodic way where we get these little almost vignettes of conversations. But I will say, if you're looking for a plot, you're not gonna find it here. It's about these socialites in London in like the 1920s who are just finding their lives so fast-paced and chaotic that they actually can't keep up with the speed of them. And so speed is this huge concept, and we see as things start to slowly spiral out of control, and then quite rapidly spiral out of control. It's great. Oh, next we have Americana. This is unforgettable. I always think about the quote, I didn't know I was black until I came to America. It's about being ostracized and treating as an other in American society, specifically as a black woman. Hair is a huge theme in this book, and you know what? It made my hair stand on end. It's going to the top. Next we have The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, which is a book you will never forget reading if you read it. A man essentially wakes up one morning and he is a giant bug. And of course the first thing that would cross your mind when you wake up as a giant cockroach is, how the hell am I gonna get to work today? Like Kim Kardashian said, no one wants to work these days. Get your ass up and work. Actually, I just moved to New York and I wouldn't even be surprised if this is how the cockroaches think, because it's like they have a job to do. These cockroaches are built different. I wouldn't be surprised if they were humans in a past life. Terrifying, holy moly. Anyway, obviously this book is so unique and brilliant and textured. She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. Next, Persuasion by Jane Austen. Listen, I know that Netflix kind of made this book into a laughingstock, and I think they owe Jane Austen a formal apology. It was this Persuasion and Regency era meets Fleabag kind of adaptation, Fleagency, if you will. But sometimes you can have lots of good things that don't work together. And the book is actually really good. It follows a character who was years ago persuaded not to marry someone that she loved because he wasn't a gentleman, but now he's had this military experience and he's come back and he's highly celebrated. She reunites with him like 8 years later, and it's basically a second shot at happiness for her. Now she has agency. Jane Austen was super ahead of her time on this. It's on the cusp here, but I think with a bit of persuasion, that was so lame. It's going in that category. I actually have another little trio of Jane Austen books here, so let's bang them out. Sense and Sensibility. Personally, this is my least favorite Jane Austen book, but it's one flop, not a flop era, you know? It still deserves its position as a classic. It's just, I'm not gonna be shouting about it from the rooftops, you know? Next up, we have Lady Susan. Now, Jane Austen wrote this when she was like 17, 18, 19. It's insane. I could barely write a convincing job application cover letter at that age. So the audacity of Jane Austen to write something this good at that age, it's actually annoying. I think it's very impressive that she did that, but it's not my favorite of her works, and so cloth-bound classic. It deserves everything it's got. Northanger Abbey has one of the best villains ever. I love how Jane Austen could write a character that you just absolutely despise with every piece of your being. Every fibre of you hates them. And John Thorpe in this book is like the original fuckboy. He's awful. You know when you've just brushed your teeth and then you drink some orange juice and the taste in your mouth is like literal death? That's him. He embodies that in like human form. And I think it's such a talent to be able to make the reader feel so strongly. So that's why my jaw is on the floor. Speaking of which, North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I am personally of the opinion that Charles Dickens got all the praise that Elizabeth Gaskell deserved. It's way better than his books. It's genuinely interesting. It's about a woman who moves from Hampshire with her family to the industrial north of England. There's a love story, but it's also about capitalism and the treatment of workers, and it's really, really great. The only way is north, and it deserves to be up there. And while we're doing directions, let's also just get the full compass and do East of Eden. It's by John Steinbeck, and it's this stunning story with completely mesmerizing characters. We follow this family in a kind of reenactment of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and it's very readable and captivating, but it is a commitment because it's so long. I think it's gonna be up there. It's getting pretty crowded in that category right now. Before we move on to the next book, I just wanted to let you know that today's video is kindly brought to you by Squarespace. Now, Squarespace is the all-in-one place that you need to build a website or an online store with genius marketing tools and analytics. For me, my whole online career has started by making a website that I could fully and completely customize myself using a template. And Squarespace has a huge variety of templates that you can choose from, and they just work as a perfect starting point, you know, to have something to work with, because I don't know about you, but the thought of creating a whole website from scratch is a bit mind-boggling. But Squarespace have truly thought of it all, so you can have all the pictures exactly where you want them, you could create a blog, you can have members-only areas, you can check the analytics to see what people are enjoying the most from your content, and it's great. So don't delay, take this as your kick up the backside to start creating your online website today. Head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when your website is looking absolutely 6 out of 5 stars, you can go to squarespace.com/jackedwards and get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code jackedwards. That's me. I'm excited to continue building my website. I can't wait to see yours, and on to the next book. Okay, now let's do some classics from other countries. So firstly, we have The God of Small Things. This is about the caste system in India, and it kind of focuses on how small events or seemingly unimportant occurrences and actions can actually shape people's lives. It is stunningly written and is a great alternative to the crusty, dusty, white European canon, and I think it deserves its spot at the top, as does Season of Migration to the North. I love books that are kind of like in conversation with other books. Like I just recently read My Dark Vanessa, which is kind of in conversation with Lolita by Nabokov. And Season of Migration to the North really seems to be in conversation with Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, but it's like a reversal. So it's about going up the Nile towards the UK. And so it's sort of about imperialism and colonialism and how people who came from colonized lands to the UK were treated as super exotic and wild and fascinating, and they were kind of objectified because of that. This book is really, really great, and I think it's a wonderful classic book that deserves to be more taught in schools and really considered part of the literary canon. And that's why it's going in my list. There you go. It's translated from Arabic. Next we have the Kite Runner, which should come with a little warning on the front that it might make you sob. It should come with protective, waterproof pages because your tears may stain them otherwise. It's about guilt and redemption and atonement, father-son relationships, friendships. Wow. Talk about running. You should be running to the bookstore to get a copy of this. It's so good. Next we have The Master and Margarita. Now, disclaimer. I think this book just went completely over my head. Like, nothing went in here. It's not you. It's actually me, and I recognize that. Like, I think when I read this, I wasn't in the right headspace to fully appreciate it. I know that I need to come back to this book and reread it because it is incredibly confusing, and the first time that I opened it, I don't know, it just didn't land, but I can see the potential. I think I didn't read it right, you know? It's a satire about the devil visiting the Soviet Union, but I will 100% give this another go. Right now, it's gonna go in the mid-tier. I do understand why it's a classic, but I don't think I've fully grasped it yet. I'm pleading the fifth. This is entirely a me problem and not the book's problem. Siddhartha follows one man's journey to spiritual fulfillment, and ultimately that's through self-discovery. Hermann Hesse did what needed to be done. Oh, should I put it up here? Maybe. Yeah, all right. It's going in the second tier. Next, we have The Art of War. Now, I read this kind of out of curiosity, I guess, but I am literally a pacifist. This is a case of me picking up a book that I inevitably wouldn't enjoy. It's basically like ancient Chinese military strategy, but a lot of the sayings and idioms that are featured in this book have actually trickled down into modern Chinese language, in Mandarin. So it still has a huge impact on Chinese culture and society, as far as I know. So I think you can kind of apply the teachings here in a modern context, but I don't really have enemies. Aside from like Daniel Defoe and Charles Dickens, but Strokes wipes them out. They've been taken care of. So even if I did have enemies, I simply would not think about them enough for me to have to think about the art of war. So meh. Giovanni's room is magical. It's just gorgeous, it's so good. And so it's bopping its way to the top. Next we have The Colour Purple, which is heartbreaking and wonderful and essential reading. The characters are so memorable, and we follow these two sisters, and it's about domestic violence and the struggle and bravery of African American women at the time. It's kind of set in the early 20th century. The Colour Purple, see the colour green. You belong at that top spot. You're through to boot camp. Let's see. Mrs. Dalloway. Oh, okay, so here's the thing. Mrs. Dalloway is about post-war trauma, and it's set over the period of 24 hours while this woman is preparing for and then hosts a party. And Virginia Woolf was just the GOAT, right? She's just so good. That's where she belongs. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I genuinely think this book is just unreadable because of how hideous and awful the language is. Like, normally I think there's, you know, we have to read classics and think about them in the context of when they were written. But this just aged like milk. In the Sahara Desert, it's an okay story, but like, to read today, I just simply wouldn't bother. Sorry. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, however, which is, you know, part of Mark Twain's same sort of series, I much preferred. It's so much better. You can argue with the wall on that one. In fact, argue with the fence. So in the cover of this picture, you can see someone painting a fence. And that's because in the book, Tom Sawyer has to do chores and he like has to paint the fence. And all the other boys in the neighborhood start laughing at him. And then he's like, wait, why are you laughing? I'm having so much fun. And they're all like, wait, if it's really fun, then I want to have a go. By the end of the day, he's got the whole neighborhood painting the fence for him, and he's just sitting back and relaxing. And now we call that the Sawyer Effect. It's the idea that if you are introduced to something as being fun, you won't see it as work. Whereas if you're introduced to something as work, you will never see it as being playful and fun. Tom Sawyer was the original gaslighter, and for that reason, cloth-bound classic. Wieland/Wyland. I think it should be called Wyland because why was this written? This, for me, is like the arsehole of the literary canon. It's a book that I've read, but it's also a book that I don't remember anything about because mentally I've tried to remove it. I had to read this for my degree and I absolutely hated it, and all I remember really is that every other book that I read for the remainder of my literature degree, if I was really hating it, I'd be like, well, at least it's not as bad as Wyland, and for that reason, shoot it from a literal canon. Get it gone, get it away from me. However, we then have The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. It is completely and utterly outrageous that this is a debut piece of fiction, because it's just so good. It's one of the books that I read like most recently on this list, and it's still with me. Toni Morrison was just such a powerhouse, and it's about how the extremity and severity of external racism causes internalized racism too in this young girl who basically, she's a young black girl, but she dreams of having blue eyes, just like those of her classmates. This is so great, and yeah, deserves its spot right there. Okay, then we have The Good Soldier, the perfect example of an unreliable narrator. The character is essentially convincing you the whole time that he is not implicated in the events that occur. But like, he's kind of sus, you know? They Walk Among Us. Sons and Lovers is basically a book about mummy issues. And yeah, it's fine. Speaking of mummy issues, next we have The Stranger by Albert Camus. It's very funny to me that these books are like hugely revered, highly respected. People have dedicated their lives to writing academic essays about these. They've sold millions of copies. And then I just sit here in my flat and reduce them down to being about mummy issues. That's all the fun of this YouTube channel, right? This book has an iconic opening line, a memorable central protagonist. It's completely absurd. It's got all the ingredients. You drop something and it was my jaw. Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. This is a masterclass in writing a plot twist. You just have to read this. I'm sorry, you just have to. Okay, I'm just gonna come out and say it. The Prince by Machiavelli is really, really boring. It's so dull. I read it so that I had permission to sound like a smartass and say that things are Machiavellian. And Machiavellian basically just means someone who is cunning and manipulative and is scheming for more power in a way that is usually morally reprehensible. And look, that's what Machiavellian means. You don't need to read the book to know that now. This is God's work. You are welcome. Silas Marner is the perfect book to read if you want to read something by George Eliot, but you don't fancy Middlemarch. The sheer length and size of that book is so intimidating, but Silas Marner is quite short, actually. It's about a man who has all his money stolen and eventually adopts a little girl, and it's good. It's good. I respect it. The Old Man and the Sea is the poor man's Moby Dick. And I'm the poor man. It's the Moby Dick for people with the attention span of a TikTok. And I fit the criteria. I fit the bill for that one, so I think it deserves its classic status. The Secret History. Now, it's no secret that I love this book. It's actually having kind of like a renaissance right now on TikTok, which I'm absolutely here for. It's basically this book about an elitist, snobby, horrible group of people who have this kind of society because they are infatuated by classics, and pretty much everyone in this book is completely insufferable. And there's nothing I like more than reading flawed and unlikable characters, and so it's going in that category. Now, one thing that I didn't really mention in the last video was classics aimed more at children. So like modern classic YA, children's books, or books just generally aimed at a younger audience. But they are classics, in my opinion. They got a lot of people into reading. They are often the first books that people really fall in love with. And for that reason, I think they deserve to be considered amongst these books too. And so firstly we have Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Not Sorcerer's Stone. You cannot convince me that this book should be called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Anyway, obviously 6 out of 5 stars. It's about magic, but the experience of reading it is exactly that as well. The whole wizarding world is genius, and you know, it made so many of us readers for life. And for that, I think it's utterly iconic. Now next we have The Hunger Games, and I think this deserves to be considered amongst the big dystopias like 1984 and Brave New World, that kind of thing. Because the world it creates is so fascinating, especially in a modern context, and the first 2 books are elite. I then do think it kind of fumbled the bag a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit, because the final book, I don't know, I didn't think it was a very satisfactory ending for me, and so that's kind of dropped it a tier for me personally, but that's just my opinion. Again, the Narnia Chronicles are just utterly captivating and spellbinding and mesmerizing, so imaginative. You already know it's up there, but also I do think that I don't remember being absolutely obsessed with every single one of the books. I said I wanted this video to be peaceful, and then I've ranked Narnia lower than Harry Potter, so like I'm literally asking for trouble at this point. The Lion, the Witch, and the audacity of this bitch. Speaking of The Testament by Margaret Atwood. Now this is, I think, probably the most modern book on this list, and I personally do not consider this to be a classic at all, but it is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which I absolutely do think is a classic, and I put in the top tier last time. However, shoot it from the literal canon. The Testament literally shattered The Handmaid's Tale for me. It's like badly written fan fiction. It's so obviously a cash grab. There was no need for a sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. The original book ends perfectly ambiguously, it's perfectly open-ended. You can tell from the first book a sequel was not planned, and it should have stayed that way. Because this is written by the same author, I think that it actually devalues the original book, and that is why I'm actually getting annoyed. So let's move on before I like flip a table or something. Actually, my laptop is balancing on my toaster right now, so there's a fun behind the scenes fact for you. The Talented Mr. Ripley, on the other hand, is so great. It's about identity theft and queer performance, and also a beautiful European summer. The vibes are immaculate, it's a page turner with great pacing, but it's also really well written. It's a big yes from me. Now, scrolling back down, Slaughterhouse-Five is one of the craziest books I've ever read. It's about the trauma of a man who was a prisoner of war in Dresden during World War II. But he perceives all of this, and his trauma makes him remember all of this as like an alien invasion, an alien abduction. It's totally unforgettable and genius, and I'm scraping my jaw off the floor as we speak. Okay, the Underground Railroad. I just think has so much potential and is such a disappointment because it's about a hugely important subject area, which is the slave trade and slavery in general, and slave narratives are so important for us to hear about and read about, but this one is so poorly executed. The characters are so one-dimensional, they're never developed. One character disappears for like half the book, and it's just never really mentioned why. It's just so bad. I honestly think this is terribly written. I'm not a fan of that book. Okay, maybe, I think I might put it there, because it's not the worst. Okay, it's just going in not approved by me. Speaking of which, Daniel Defoe, we meet again, my friend or Defoe. Tell me why this man just wrote multiple books about the exact same kind of thing. He would write about women who kind of sell their bodies to make money and have a ton of babies. Like, he uses the fact that the woman has a baby as like a plot point constantly. So every time the narrative starts to slow down, he's like, oh, she's pregnant again. It's constantly telling you the exact amount of money she has in her purse. I lost track of how many children she'd had, and I didn't care. Not approved by me. A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Arthur Conan Doyle was my absolute hero growing up, and it's going up there. No shit, Sherlock. Now, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie is a severely underrated classic. 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, 12 out of 10. This is so great with so much texture. It's about the Scottish Reformation and Calvinism and predestination. And Miss Jean Brodie is this teacher who believes in kind of predetermination. And we watch as the kids in her class, who she's kind of like assigned different identities to, grow up, and how they think about her as adults as well as children. And I think about this book regularly. Next we have Nadia, which is translated from French. This gave us the quote, "Beauty will be convulsive or it will not be at all." And for that, it's at least gonna be a cloth-bound classic, right? Aside from that, I don't think it's really massively mind-blowing, but there are some good quotes, so cloth-bound classic it is. We then have Brighton Rock. Now, if you like Peaky Blinders, you will love this book. It's like the original Peaky Blinders, but it's these kids who are gangsters in Brighton. If it has 1 million fans, I'm one. If it has 100 fans, I'm one. If it has 0 fans, then I am dead, because this book is great and I'll always be a fan of it. And I would love to see this adapted into a TV show. I think it would be so good. Okay, final stretch, guys. The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Morn. This will make you want to book the next flight to Paris. It follows a bunch of people who ultimately realize that their goals and aspirations, whether that's marriage or wealth or notoriety or spiritual enlightenment, maybe won't actually bring them fulfillment and satisfaction in the end. And you know, that's a gross simplification of what this book is about, but it is brilliant. So I like it a lot. Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood and the Berlin stories brought us the character Sally Bowles. They brought us the inspiration for the musical Cabaret, and they're good fun. It's about scandalous behaviour and sexual liberation in Berlin, and there's a great cast of like weird and wacky characters. So goodbye to Berlin, and also goodbye to this video with the end of the video, Howard's End. It's almost like I planned it. How satisfying is that? This deserves its place as a cloth-bound classic. So these are my final rankings. These are the books at the top, and then these are the books that are not at the top. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. I definitely enjoyed making it. It was fun to make a little part 2. A massive shout out, of course, to Squarespace for sponsoring the video. The link is down below. If you disagree with me, I'm sure you've already typed out your angry comment. Until next time, all the best, stay in touch, have a wonderful day. Please be nice to me, I'm fragile. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!